I'm joined now by Andy Slavitt, a former top healthcare official in the Obama administration, Katty Kay, Washington anchor for BBC News, and Dr. Nahid Bhadlia, the medical director of special pathogens at Boston University School of Medicine. Dr. Slavitt, Andy Slavitt, beginning with you, because of your experience in how government deals with these medical trade-offs. What do you think is important in where we are? Obviously, there are some places that, in all fairness, have had lower incidence rates and can argue that they should take a different approach than one size fits all. But we just walked through the concerns by so many.
Right. There's not a person in the country that wouldn't like to get us back to normal life. I don't really think there's this dichotomy that exists between people who would like us to be back and have a better economy and those who would like to make sure everybody's healthy. The truth is, though, the American public is saying in pretty large numbers, whether they live in Georgia, New York, or California, that until they're safe, they're not going to be comfortable doing the things that move the economy back again, getting on airplanes, buying things, if they're an employer, hiring people, making loans, taking loans. So I think we have to understand that making people feel safe means we've got to have a smaller case count, we've got to have adequate testing, we've got to have the ability to track and trace. The governments need to work together to show that. Trump and the governors did not shut down this economy. The American consumer and employer did, and I think they're going to be the ones that bring it back, and they're only going to do that when we make some advances.
Well, respectfully, that's a little bit of rhetoric, what you're saying, right? I mean, I understand what you're saying, but many people are living through governmental required rules. So it's not that there's been a voluntary pullback from all participation. And while the experts tell us these are the right rules, as you know, Mr. Slavitt, there are plenty of people in the country who are economically feeling like they want to know when they could get back to work because they're balancing debts and risk of losing their homes and all of that. I'm not suggesting that you're insensitive to any of that, but it is still mandatory for many people, right?
Well, look, it's hard on everybody, and it's particularly hard on people who are living paycheck to paycheck. A third of people are not able to make their rent. 40% of there's 40 million Americans that are experiencing some form of hunger. But even with that, there's a Kaiser Family Foundation poll that just came out, which said that even with the sacrifices they're making, 80% of the public would prefer to feel safe and figure it out than to jump back in too quickly. Now, that may change over time, and I think people only have a limited tolerance of patience. But here's my point. My point is that a governor saying, go out and be free, people aren't going to go start sharing popsicles again right away. People are smarter than that, and I think it would be smarter for political leaders to understand that people want to feel safe first before they can take those steps. That's really my point.
Yeah. No, and I wanted to tease that out with you, and I hear that. Doctor, your views on the above?
Yeah, I do think that most people understand the importance of this, right? As we're opening up, the reason the models have sort of predicted higher death, part of this is the reopening that might be happening in some states, but even in other states that are at their peak, you're seeing longer peaks, which means that people are letting their guard down. There's a small percentage of people who are letting their guard down that need to be reminded about why this is important, because the hospitals are still full. I mean, our hospital is still full. We're not nowhere near the end of this. We're still lingering in Boston around the peak and sort of coming slowly off. And so I think it's going to be important to understand it takes everybody's cooperation, but also for states that open. You're talking about Texas opening and Louisiana is not. It's still Louisiana's problem if there's a big outbreak that happens in Texas. And so it is the state's responsibilities, but I think it's going to have to be a regional strategy as we open this up.
I want to bring in Katty Kay, and we've tried to always lead with the medical science and then also keep everyone abreast of everything else. And we have a whole debate in this country over the handling of this crisis and this president. Al Gore came out endorsing Joe Biden, and he said his focus is on what, as a community, the country can do despite the president, who he said has been just completely incompetent in dealing with this in this emergency moment. Here was Speaker Pelosi just today on MSNBC discussing what the president knew and when he knew it. Take a look.
What did the president know, and when did he know it? This president has presided over the worst disaster in our country's history. an assault on the lives and the livelihoods of the American people. And he did so by neglect of information, also denial and delay in accepting the facts.
Where do you see that part of this issue? While everyone wants the best immediate emergency response and information and all this, the public safety stuff, while at the same time, it seems a little bit frustrating to so many to say, well, wait a minute, when will there be a reckoning for a president who's literally out there ducking the signals, spinning people, giving terrible misinformation that's been disproven, disinfectant on down? I mean, it doesn't stop.
I think the two are related, right? What happened in the past and the degree to which all the reporting suggests the president underplayed even his presidential daily briefing, according to the Washington Post reporting today, and the number of times that the coronavirus was put into that briefing over the course of January and February. And the White House's consistent desire to downplay the severity of this virus is impacting exactly what you have just been talking about with medical experts there, and that is the potential to reopen, because there has to be a level of trust in what you are hearing for people to be able to feel that it is safe to go back. And also, there has to be a level of trust in that the information is correct so that local officials make the right decisions. I mean, you look at somewhere like Georgia, for example, where the health commissioner has just admitted we reopened, but we haven't actually met all of the guidelines that the White House has set us. There were 5 criteria we were meant to meet. Well, we only met 3, but hey, that's good enough. And I think it's because of the mixed messaging coming out even today from the White House that people are making rash decisions.
Yeah. I mean, you lay that out and that reporting. And then before I bring in our next guest, who's an expert on how these kind of briefings can work, let's remember how the president sounded during the very period that we now know he's getting these briefings. Everyone take a look.
We think we have it very well under control. We have very little problem in this country.
Well, we pretty much shut it down coming in from China.
Now, the virus that we're talking about having to do, a lot of people think that goes away in April with the heat.
We're finding very little problem. Now, you treat this like a flu. When you have 15 people, and the 15 within a couple of days is going to be down to close to 0, it's going to disappear. One day, it's like a miracle. It will disappear.
We're going to bring in now David Priess. He was a former intelligence officer and literally did the daily briefings for the president on behalf of the CIA. He also wrote the President's Book of Secrets, the history of the president's daily brief. And we want to bring you in here to make sure for the entire group that we have this understanding. What does it mean that the president was getting these briefings and then sounding the way we just heard?
Yeah, the timing in that Washington Post report indicated that he was getting updates from the intelligence community about the situation in China and about how it was likely to develop at the same time that he's making those statements you just played. That means things like, it's going to disappear, or we've had 15 cases, but it's going to 0 real soon. In his intelligence briefings were reports saying, based on what we're seeing internationally, that's not likely. Now, there are 2 possible ways to interpret that. One is that the president internalized that, probably not by reading the briefings, because also in that reporting was indication he doesn't read the book, he just takes oral briefings. But in the oral briefings, perhaps he got the information and he simply chooses to discard it. He chooses not to believe it because it's an uncomfortable truth. The other option is he actually didn't get the information at all because the reporting says he doesn't read the book and he only gets oral briefings 2 or 3 times a week. Maybe his aides are doing him a disservice by not making sure he has that information on the days when he doesn't get oral briefings from the intelligence community.
David, how do you contrast this to the storyline that everyone remembers from before this pandemic, which was the president's battles with all of the nonpartisan, long-term federal intelligence services, whether he was beefing with the CIA and the Russia stuff, FBI, where he took out the director, then took out the acting director, McCabe, then demanded for his investigation. All of that passed as prologue because it would seem to suggest that the president has a long-term problem getting these kind of facts. And then in the Russia probe, maybe the resolution was a matter that remains contested to this day for many politically. There are people who disagree about the resolution of that matter. I don't think there is any way to disagree about the fact that the medical experts through the intelligence were saying this pandemic's coming, and here it is.
Right. I think it goes to something even more fundamental, Ari, which is all presidents disagree with some of the intelligence analysis they get because it's difficult for their policy objectives. It's a natural human thing. This president doesn't like to be told that something he believes is wrong, or perhaps more so than any other president. But that is the fundamental job of the intelligence community, to give objective analysis, to tell truth to power. Mr. President, this is the way we see it based on our information. Here's what we know. Here's what we don't know. Here's what we assess. This president doesn't like being told things that he doesn't agree with. That's obvious in his public and his private statements. So guess what? You're always going to have a clash there, and this president has clashed with them because of this. The fact that he's still taking some briefings from the intelligence community is a very good sign, but to what end? If he's taking them and he's not internalizing the information being briefed such that he can go out through the whole month of February and say those things he said, then what is the point of those briefings at all?
What is the point?
Well, you hope that some of the messages are getting through, whether it's one a day that, Mr. President, today we need to focus on North Korea because of some North Korean nuclear information we've found out. But we also should mention that China is lying about this virus. Maybe the message on North Korea was more important to get through that day, and there still is a value to those intelligence briefings for the president. My concern is, if indeed there were a dozen or more reports in this time period about this virus, and yet the president was going out and saying these things publicly, it showed that perhaps, again, he wasn't getting it, or he was getting it, but thought that he knew better, and he did not need to prepare the American people for what the intelligence was suggesting was coming.
Caddy?
Well, or there's a third alternative, which is that President Trump wanted to wish this away, and that his concern and his focus was on the damage that this could do to the economy and the stock market in particular. And so he didn't want the bad news to get out there. And look, to be fair, he's not the only leader to have been put in this position. You had on March the 3rd, Boris Johnson bragging really about still shaking hands with people, saying, oh, I'm glad to say that I still shake hands with people. A month later, he has very serious coronavirus infection, and he ends up in the ICU in the hospital. So Donald Trump isn't the only one, but there have been repeated instances of him wanting to give the best possible spin to this in order to protect his ratings and the economy.
Well, Caddy, you make such an important point, because isn't that the difference between what is empirical truth and the rest of it? In other words, there were things that Donald Trump was doing that defied Republican orthodoxy in the primary, and everyone, including some of us in the press, but certainly everyone in the Republican Party, said you can't do that. You can't take that position. You can't go against this or that sacred cow, so to speak. And he did, and he beat everybody. Then they said, well, this scandal will bring you down. You can't fight with a Gold Star family or attack John McCain or all the things everyone remembers. And his political approach of disappearing away things and literally looking like he's the one who doesn't have reality and then reshaping a type of political reality, that worked. And yet that is so different from this deadly empirical scientific pandemic we're living through, where you cannot, not only can you not do that, it makes it worse. We've had experts come on the show. I'll go to Caddy and then Andy, who literally say that ignorance is deadly right now.
I mean, I think you're quite right about the history of President Trump and about the ignorance being deadly. And to some degree, the sole advantage that the United States has at the moment is that it comes after other countries. And you only have to look at the news coming out of, take Germany, for example, where they opened up a week ago and the infection rate over the course of the last 8 days has ticked up again. And now they're having to warn people again about, right, we may have to shut down. America has that advantage. The president could take other countries and learn from their example. It's not something he's in the habit of doing, but it is, it is an example of where you can learn and save lives by learning.
Look, I think to work for President Trump is to have to learn how to work around President Trump, and to be someone, whether you're an intelligence officer or someone in the Justice Department, or today, Dr. Birx or Dr. Fauci, is to be in an extraordinarily difficult position where you really want to prevail like you would in wartime on a wartime leader with a set of facts that you don't think he's going to interpret personally, that he will use to allow him to make the right decisions. And instead, he's leeching on to whatever good news he hears from a friend of his that has no backing, and he will take that out to the American public. And so he would be smarter, I think, to realize what I think Governor Cuomo and others have realized, which is the public has actually got more tolerance for the fact that this is a marathon, that there aren't any great answers. He doesn't have to have good news at every press conference. He's got to play it straight, and the public can handle more bad news than he's been willing to deliver. I think he is used to being able to spin his way, as you said, Ari, through any situation to look like he's winning, and that's just the wrong formula here.
Yeah. I'm going to fit in a break. I want to thank Andy Slavitt, Katty Kay, Dr. Bedelia, and David Priest. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.